Hello everyone, and welcome to part 4 of this 3-part tutorial series. So a lot of people have been writing in saying that the lighting does not loop in the tutorial, and yeah, I think it's about time we learn how to loop the lighting perfectly, because I didn't really explain that very clearly. So first things first, let's look at how to check the lighting on the first and the last frame, because this is what we're gonna need to know how to do to troubleshoot this issue of the lighting. So if you go, you have your Octane window up here, go to the first frame, and do store render buffer. And now what this is going to do is going to put that that frame as a thing that you can toggle on and off in the render window here. And if you go to the last frame, now we can see the difference between the first and the last frame here. You know, so this is what frame 360 is looking like. That's what's rendering here. And this other side, the right side, is frame 0. So if you look between, you know, there's a big difference in lighting, of course. One's much brighter, one is darker. So we got to get to the bottom of why this isn't working. So if you go to a side view here, I'm pressing F3, you can see that on the first and the last frame, it is actually quite different. You know, if you go to frame 0 and frame 360, the difference is that you know, the whole scene scales up and gets bigger. So at the end, you have this big scene, you know, this big instance that's casting new lights and shadows onto your other scene here. You'll also notice that there's a little thing in there, and that is the small scene is you know, changing, because like if you go to the first frame, you have this little scene in the middle there, and then it gets bigger, and now there's no littler scene, you know. So basically what's going on is between the first and the last frame, there are different scenes, and those are going to cast different lighting and shadows onto your scene. So what we have to do is get rid of the scenes that are different. The way we're going to do that is by taking this big scene here. I have it as the base instance biggest. If you followed the other tutorials, you should have a similar looking setup here. So the biggest one, basically, you know, between the first and the last frame, the last frame has this new bigger scene, the first frame does not. So to get that to match, we need to fade off this big scene. And what I'm going to do, since I'm using Octane, you can put a an object tag on here, and you can change the visibility. You just keyframe it off, basically. So, you know, like whatever you want, let's say the last 3 seconds here, we'll do a keyframe for visibility 1, and then take it down to 0. And now, essentially, what's going on? Let's just sort of see here in the viewer. So you have turn that comparison thing off. So you have this scene in here, and what's going to happen is it's going to fade off. Oh wait, I forgot to do something. So the visibility thing does not work if this is set onto render instance. So the ones that you fade off, you need to set onto instance, and now it will fade out over time, and it will match the first frame, like so. So basically what's happening, this big scene here, this big instance is fading off, and now it's going to look similar to the first frame. You will also need to do that for the little scene that's in the middle here, this little instance. So this little one here, the smallest one, basically it's here in the first frame, it's not here in the last frame. So we need to have it so it's not in the first frame, so that it matches the last frame here, right? So in the last frame, there's no little one there. First frame, there is a little one here. So this has to basically just fade on. So we're doing the same thing, but the opposite. So we're going to put this visibility tag on here. It's going to start with 0 visibility, and then it will fade up to 1 visibility. And again, this needs to be set onto instance for this to work. This might not be immediately noticeable, but if you look inside here and the lighting in this on the first and last frame, you will notice that this is going to change if you don't address this issue here. So now, when we test our scene, here's frame 360. And let's wait for this to render. Okay, and now let's store this render buffer. So now we have our frame 360 there. Go to frame 0. And now the lighting on these finally matches. So now we can render this out, and it should look perfect once we render it. All right, so my render has finished. Here we go, moment of truth. Check out this seamless loop, and oh, it's not perfect. Oh, that's annoying. Yeah, up here, it still pops. Okay, so the problem here is the GI clamp is not set high enough. I got this tip from Ryan Talbot. Sometimes in a scale loop like this, if the GI clamp is too low, it like clips the lighting when the lights are different scales or something like that. So you can fix this just by bumping the GI clamp up a little bit. So let's try rendering this out again. All right, and here's the new render with the GI clamp bumped up to 50, and nice. Oh yeah, look at that seamless loop. That's real nice. Okay, so sometimes you're in a situation where you can't use this fading technique. Like here's an example where I made a piece with aphoria, and we were having issues with the lighting not matching up on the first and last frame. And if you can see, you know, here's the whole scene going, it's all moving down. And when you go back to the first frame, you know, these extra instances are in different positions and casting different lights and shadows on the scene, so we got to get rid of them. We could not fade them off in this situation because the scene was really, really complicated and the fading thing wasn't working. It was on render instances, and so we had to find out a different solution. So the way that I addressed this was by just animating in and animating out the instances that cause this to look different. So instead of fading them off, I am getting them out of the way by animating them on and off. And now if you look at the first and last frame, they look the same. And yeah, so that's another way that you can do this, is that sometimes you can move them out of the way instead of fading them if that isn't going to work for you in your scene. Yep, we've all been here before. You rendered the whole thing, it took 100 hours, and then the lighting does not match at the end. So if you're in a situation like this where you're using this kind of loop, which is like a rotation-based loop or a positional-based loop, something where the keyframes are linear keyframes, a thing that I do is you can go to the camera settings here, or you can go to your keyframes rather for your camera, and then at the end of these keyframes, change the after to continue. So now the animation is going to continue, and then you can extend your timeline by, you know, half a second or so. And then all we're going to do is re-render this last half second, and then you can just fade that over your keyframes in After Effects. So because, you know, this camera move is linear, and we did continue, it should just continue looping in the exact same way. So you do this, you add this extra half second on, and then bring your render into After Effects. So we have up to frame 360, 12 seconds. Let's split that. Here are the extra 15 frames that we have on at the end, this extra half second. All you gotta do is bring that over to the start of your comp. So now this extra continued motion is just gonna continue here, and then you just fade this off. Just fade this off now, like that. So now it should fade it into back to the first frames. So now you're not going to get a pop. You're going to get a nice smooth fade and a nice smooth loop. So this will work for an animation like this, where you can just loop the keyframes like this because they're linear keyframes. This will not really work for the scale loop, because the way the scale loop works, it's these weird kind of curved keyframes. I think somebody said it's a logarithmic scale or an exponential scale or something like that. So you can't just do continue on these because it won't have this same velocity. So it's not really going to work. Jesus. So let's figure it out. So you gotta, let's see. Okay, go to your keyframes here, right? So go from, it's going 0 to 360. Okay, so we basically need to get this motion to continue for just like 15 frames, so that then we can fade it out. Okay, so go to your scale loop, go to the last frame, frame 360. Take you have these things here from the last tutorial. So take take your instances out of this hierarchy, because all the animation is keyframed in these nulls, right? Here's a scale up null. Then we back it up, get that to the first frame here, frame 0, and then let's put everything back in that scale hierarchy, right? So now it's going to continue as if it started from the beginning, right? Okay, so now that we have this motion continuing in the exact same way that it was before, so now just render out these first 15 frames, and then you can fade them over, and it should work just fine. Okay, so here it is. Here's the original scale, the original render that we had, which pops at the end. Okay, and then we took basically this whole geometry setup, and we put it back into the animation at this first frame, right? So now it's going to continue like that. Okay, so far so good. And then we just fade this out, and it should line up with the animation because we use the same animation. Oh yeah, look at that. So now that fades over and it all works out perfectly. Look at that. Yeah, so if you're lazy like me, you can avoid all of this just by tricking the viewer into thinking that a change in lighting is normal by making the lighting change constantly throughout the whole loop so that when it does pop at the end, nobody will even notice. So just make a bunch of flashing lights, and then when the lighting does change at the end, it'll look totally normal and it'll look super cool because you have flashing lights all over the place. So that's how you get the light in a loop. Thank you so much for watching this video, and let me know if you have any questions, and I will do my best to answer them in the comments. Thanks again, guys. Have a good one.